Hi guys, let's talk about Qigong. Welcome to this episode. All right, so the first question is from Johnny Dangerously. All right, Joni Dangerously. From episode 56, it says, "Hello Adam, I have a couple of questions. Question one is actually post training or should it not actually be pose training? So post as in P-O-S-T, like a pose, or pose training, like you're posing. It seems you're holding a pose. Second question, how do you know if it's working for sure?" All right, good question. So here we go. Both a pose training or a posing type of training, they're both actually just English words that we borrow. The Chinese term for standing Qigong is Zham Zhong, which means there's no direct translation. Zham could be a stop or like a structure where like a bus stop kind of thing. And Zhong literally means like a structure. So it's a still structure, which really doesn't make much sense in English, I guess. So people nicknamed it pose training or post training. So may I suggest not to get too hung up on the labels, which seems to be really common. I noticed recently in the YouTube comments where people are asking about Loi Gong versus Qigong versus internal alchemy versus this and that. And it seems like people are really getting hung up on the labels of Qigong and try to put it in conceptual boxes. That's really against what Taoism is. We try not to put things in conceptual boxes because it kind of go against the Taoist idea of spontaneous movement or spontaneous flow or letting the Qi teach you or being one with the Tao. And this is really important because the idea of fixating something into a box and the symptom being extremely hung up on labels is going to stop you from critical thinking skills. And it's actually more important to know what your goals are and are you getting the benefits. That's the most important part. Like, what is it you want to get out of this? To stop anxiety, to stop depression, to get your energy back, to feel some peace of mind for a change, to reduce stress. Like, what are your goals? And once you identify your goal, the next question is, do you actually know how to train to get those benefits in a measurable timeline? That is really what this stuff is for, to make you feel better, to relieve suffering. But a lot of times people approach it like academic. They don't practice very much and they're hung up on labels. I'm not saying you're like that. I'm saying please don't fall into that trap. To give you an example of this logic, which is very common nowadays, I'm going to use a martial art metaphor because I taught martial arts for 24 years. Most people that follow this podcast don't do martial arts, so I'm just going to explain some terms. There's a Chinese martial art called Wing Chun. It tends to attract people that are very obsessed with the system, almost like a religion or a cult or some kind of doctrine belief system they can't step outside of, right? And then people can get really emotionally attached to this style called Wing Chun. And I used to teach that system when I used to teach in person before COVID. I closed my school during the COVID time. And I'll tell you a story of how humans can fall into a trap of falling into a label. Hopefully we don't do that in Qigong, which will definitely reduce your chances of healing yourself and feeling better. So here's a story. I was teaching Wing Chun and somebody came in to take lessons and he was wondering what to do against a double leg tackle, someone grabbing you in the legs and throwing you on the ground. And I can tell just by interviewing this guy before I accepted him as a student, he was really hung up on labels, in this case Wing Chun, and really hung up and attached to a system. And he would not step outside the doctrine of a system. And I know from experience this kind of thinking is really rigid, which usually lead people of getting either knocked out or submitted, or basically they won't be able to defend themselves as well as their potential will allow them had they not been so attached to labels and systems. So to test that, when he asked me what to do against a tackle, on purpose, I taught him two techniques, Technique A and Technique B. Both of those techniques were not from Wing Chun, or if I remember that right, it was many years ago. The first technique was designed to fail, Technique A. There's no way it's going to work. I designed it to fail on purpose. And I taught it to him, and I call it Wing Chun, his favorite style. The second technique works pretty well. And oh yeah, and actually it was from Wing Chun. But instead I call it karate because I know he hated karate. So I got a training partner who was an ex-wrestler to tackle him and throw him on the ground. Every time he did his favorite style technique Wing Chun, even though it wasn't from Wing Chun, but I tricked him, and it was designed to fail, sure enough, he was getting slammed on the ground over and over and over and over again, and he was very frustrated. Then I told him to try Technique B. And Technique B had a pretty good chance of working because it was designed to work under that experiment. And he was succeeding, if I remember correctly, about 7 times or 8 times out of 10. That's a pretty good success rate for the first round of the first try, right? But even though it's from Wing Chun, I called it karate on purpose because I know he hated that name karate. And sure enough, even though he was winning, he was still not happy, right? At the end of the experiment, I asked him, which technique do you want to train now? Even though Technique A doesn't work. And I gave it his favorite style named Wing Chun. And Technique B did work, but I call it the style he hated, which was karate. To my surprise, but now that I think back, not really, he says, I want to train Technique A. I'm like, you want to train Technique A even though it doesn't work? He said, yeah, because it's my favorite style. I'm going to make it work eventually. So people would rather get slammed on the ground and lose, and in combat, that can mean death, than to give up their belief system and a label that they're emotionally attached to. That's an example of how stubborn people can be. That they'd rather not get the benefit, in this case being able to protect themselves and risk dying, than to give up their belief system. The first symptom being a box conceptual concept wrapped up in a label. And I see this now, 20 years later, now that I'm teaching Qigong, over and over and over again. This stuff is really to heal your body first, your emotions second, and then merge spiritually last. What is the original purpose of Taoism. There's many traditions that does this, not just Taoism. Christian mystics, Hinduism, Buddhism, Shintoism. If you can find the right teacher, even Confucianism. So there's many, many systems around the world that does this. And that is just the mystic tradition. If we go into the shamanistic tradition, there's also a lot of other tradition that can get you to merge spiritually and also heal you emotionally. That's the goal. But because of the belief system and the labels, sometimes people get so wrapped up in those labels that it seems like they care more about the names than they do how to actually train and how to actually get the results they want. This is very, very important. One of my teachers actually on purpose just called this stuff the stuff. That way he sidestepped all the academic label arguments, right? So I hope that answered that first question. Is it called post-training or pose-training? It doesn't really matter because it's just an English name borrowed to try their best to describe something that has no translation in the actual Chinese label. So that's the first thing. Your second question, how do you know if it works? How do you know if post-training works? Post-training was designed to enhance your physical vitality, to charge your lower burner or your lower dantian, which is 85% of your immune system. Some of the things that will happen, well, you got to get physically healthier. In my case, I did post-training 32 years ago, but it was just dabbling. But 5 years ago, when I was extremely sick, I started to do post-training seriously. And I did Qigong 2 to 4 hours a day. And I'm using the label Qigong very loosely, right? So when I was doing post-training and sitting, if we're going to concentrate on standing or post-training, I had a lot of brain fog. I couldn't walk. Some days I couldn't even walk across the street without throwing up. Some days I was normal. I was dizzy all the time. I was getting sick all the time. My allergies were acting up all the time. I had high blood pressure and zero energy. And that was just the physical part. And I was starting to lose a bit of fine motor skills. Like, just grabbing a coffee cup or even just picking up a book and opening it. Like I was drop things all the time. So this was concerning me. So when I was practicing Qigong quite a bit, after, I can't remember the exact time, I think it was by the 4th month, if I remember correctly. And I was standing at least 45 minutes a day, every single day. And then I noticed that these symptoms that I was describing to you, getting dizzy, losing fine motor skills a bit, couldn't walk without throwing up, getting sick all the time, high blood pressure, allergies, all this stuff was starting to disappear. So I was healing myself, right? So that would be an example of how do you know this stuff is working based on long-term benefits. And also, a lot of my students report the same thing. Like if I just even, actually I'm not gonna pull it up because it takes too long, but you can go to my website, adamchanlive.com, and you can read the testimonials. Some people have stomach problem, some people have energy problem, some people have depression problem, the list goes on. And Qigong has helped them quite a bit. So I hope that answers that question. How do you know if something works? Is when you're getting the benefits, feeling a lot better, and you're healing all these problems. Long-term benefits. But even before the long-term benefit, just practicing in the immediate moment of practice, you will start feeling stuff. If you just stand there like this with your arms like that and just stand there, nothing's gonna happen. You gotta actually learn the training method, which is what I talked about in the beginning of this podcast. Don't get hung up on words or concepts. Leave your mind open. Learn the actual training method. Train consistently, and you will start getting these benefits. I hope that helps. All right, guys, please leave your message and your questions below, and I'll get right back to you guys. Before I go, I want to let you know what the Taoist school community is that I always talk about. Basically, we train one time a week together in a live stream class. Half the class is guided meditation, the other half is live Q&A. It comes with a student forum for supportive learning so I can individualize and customize the instruction for you. Because contrary to popular belief, Qigong is not like a cast in stone system. It's very much alive in which you adapt and adjust this, like the training methods to each particular student, right? And besides that, all the classes is stored in the student library. So if you miss the live stream class, it's in the student library. All right, guys, that's it. See you guys next time. Have a good weekend.